The wind moved like a tired sigh across the plains, brushing dry grass into long whispers as the sun sagged behind the barn's splintered roof. Inside, the girl knelt beside the family horse, her fingers gentle against the cracked old hoof, her breath warm fog in the cold air. She had no coat. Her shawl was frayed and thin as paper, but she worked with the quiet grace of someone who'd stopped expecting warmth from anything but the animals. Dust clung to her. Dust from the floors she scrubbed, the ashes she hauled, the road she'd never walked. Her name had once meant something, spoken softly by a mother with a voice like lullabies. But that name had drowned beneath the barked commands of a woman who'd married her father only to outlive him, and now treated the girl as little more than a living broom. She didn't speak unless spoken to. She didn't cry anymore, not because she lacked the sorrow, but because tears were a luxury, like clean socks or a smile. The horse's name was Jonah. He was older than any man left in her life. His mane hung in long gray ropes, and one eye was veiled in milk-white fog. He smelled of old hay, rusted iron, and something else, something like loyalty. She pressed her forehead to his neck and closed her eyes. Jonah didn't move, but she felt his warmth press back. This was the only place she could breathe. Not the house, where the stepmother's boots clicked like gunshots across wooden floors, where every glance was a judgment, every word a snare. Here, in the half-dark with Jonah's slow breath beside her, she could pretend she was still a girl and not just a set of hands that cleaned, stirred, and obeyed. Her fingers lingered in Jonah's tangled mane. Once, when she was little, she'd ridden him bareback across the pasture, her mother's laughter echoing across the wind like music. That pasture was gone now. Sold for debt. And her mother, buried under wild sage with a headstone carved by her father's own trembling hands. He was gone too. Fever took him before the second winter after the wedding. The stepmother cried at his funeral, loud and long, but her eyes had been dry when she told the girl to start sleeping in the root cellar and hand over her shoes. "You're near grown," she'd said, mouth pinched. "You'll earn your keep." The girl had nodded. What else could she do? A floorboard creaked behind her. She didn't turn. "You still in here, fool child?" came the voice, dry as corn husk, sharp as flint. "If you think whisperin' to that sack of bones will clean the stove, you got another thing comin'. I'll finish before sundown," the girl said softly. The stepmother stepped into the barn, her silhouette long and crooked in the doorway. Her dress was black, always black, like mourning had become a uniform. Her fingers, curled around a worn switch, tapped it against her palm. "You better. Some of the boys from 3 Mile are passin' through. They need supper. Maybe one of them'll take a likin' to you if you keep your head down and don't talk much. Lord knows I'm tired of feedin' extra mouths." The girl didn't answer. Her pulse throbbed in her throat. The woman sneered. "Useless animal," she muttered, swatting Jonah's flank with the stick. He didn't flinch. Just turned his head, slow and deliberate, to stare at her with that one good eye. There was something ancient in it. Unblinking. Unimpressed. The stepmother hesitated, then huffed and turned back toward the house. Her voice floated over her shoulder. "And wipe that look off your face before you come inside." Silence returned, heavy and aching. The girl exhaled, slowly, like someone remembering how. She traced Jonah's jaw, murmuring beneath her breath. "You're not useless," she said. "You're the last thing left that knows who I used to be." He lowered his head slightly, nostrils flaring. She smiled for the first time that day, small, fleeting, but real. Then she stood and brushed off her skirt. Her knees cracked. Her back ached. She was 17 but moved like someone older, someone worn down by years instead of seasons. At the barn door, she paused and looked back. The sun had dipped low, casting Jonah in golden silhouette. His shadow stretched long across the straw, like a knight keeping watch over a crumbled castle. She whispered, "If I vanish, you'll remember me, won't you?" Jonah didn't blink. Didn't move. Just breathed. She stepped into the cold, the wind catching her hair like 1,000 hands. The smell of stew wafted from the house. Her stomach clenched. The porch creaked beneath her bare feet. Inside, laughter echoed, rough men's laughter, thick with smoke and drink. She slipped into the kitchen, eyes down. The stew pot was bubbling too hard, nearly burning. She reached for the ladle. And stopped. Her letter was gone. It had been hidden behind the flour sack, words she'd written on scraps, dreams folded into corners. Letters to no one. To herself. Her only secret. Her breath caught. Then came the voice from the parlor, laughing harder now. Can't even write right. Listen to this, boys. One day I'll be free, and I'll ride Jonah past the edge of this town, and the wind'll remember my name. They laughed louder. Boots stomped. Glass broke. The stepmother's voice followed, shrill and gloating. Found her little stories. Fool girl thinks the horse sprout wings. The girl stood frozen, ladle in hand, cheeks burning. Jonah. They'd read her words. Mocked them. Mocked him. She didn't cry. Just turned back toward the door, heart pounding with something too sharp for sorrow. Outside, the wind picked up. And in the barn, under shadows older than memory, Jonah lifted his head. The frost came early that year, crawling like silver moss across windows and fence posts. The sky was bleached white, stripped of warmth, and the girl moved beneath it with the stiffness of someone trying not to be seen by the heavens themselves. Her hands were cracked from hauling water. Her breath smoked in front of her like ghost whispers. Every morning, she raked ashes from the stove and stared too long into them, as if searching for something she'd once lost inside a fire. The merchant came on a Wednesday. His wagon creaked up the road just after sunrise, painted bright red but faded by wind and sun. He wore a coat of fine wool, the kind that looked foolish out here, and a grin that lingered too long on every woman, even the married ones. The stepmother had set her bonnet just right that morning. She watched him from the porch with the eyes of someone already making bargains. "Widow Sam's?" he said with a bow. "Heard your barn roof caved last spring. Heard you could use fresh horses. And maybe..." He let his gaze wander, slow and calculated, until it landed on the girl chopping wood beside the well. "A little less trouble around the house." The girl straightened slowly, the axe still in her hand. She didn't flinch, didn't blush. Just met his stare like a cold windowpane meets rain. The stepmother noticed. Her smile flickered. That evening, the deal was made without words. The girl knew it when the stepmother served her stew hot and gave her a second piece of bread. When she brushed the girl's hair for the first time in years. When she said, "Try to smile. Men like that." The merchant stayed 3 nights. He brought a comb carved from bone. Gave it to the girl without asking her name. She accepted it politely, her fingers folding around it like a prisoner folds bars. He spoke with charm that clinked like coins, light, loud, and hollow. "You got an honest face," he said, reclining against the porch rail. "That's rare in a girl. I could put you in a townhouse. Let you rest." She didn't respond. "Don't talk much, do you?" he added, laughing. "That's all right. I prefer the quiet ones." That night, she dreamed of Jonah galloping across water, his hooves leaving no ripples. She rode without reins. Without fear. But when she woke, her fingers were clenched and aching. On the 4th day, the merchant brought someone new. A girl younger. Pale blue dress. Ribbons in her curls and a voice like cracked sugar. She giggled as she swung down from the wagon, looked around with bored eyes, and said, "Is this it? Doesn't even look like there's a piano here." The merchant wrapped an arm around her waist and said, "Don't worry, darling. We won't be long." The stepmother stared hard at him. The girl said nothing. Just watched from the barn's shadow, the comb still tucked in her pocket like a knife with no edge. The merchant didn't look her way again. By sundown, he was gone. Dust rose behind the wagon wheels like smoke over dry land. Later, as the girl swept the kitchen floor, the stepmother stood by the stove, lips pursed, arms folded. "Can't even keep a man interested for 4 days," she snapped. "Too plain. Too quiet. No wonder your own father didn't leave you nothin'. The girl paused, her hands tightening around the broom handle. You better pray another one comes along, or I'll have no use for you. That night, the girl didn't sleep. She sat beside Jonah in the barn, knees drawn up, face pressed to his side. He was warm beneath his ragged coat, chest rising like a tide. His breath smelled of hay and thyme. She whispered, I'm not plain. I'm just not for sale. Jonah shifted, his ears flicking. She told him everything, about the merchant, about the ribbon girl, about the comb she hadn't used. Her voice broke once, but not from weakness. Only from the pressure of holding too much for too long. She stayed until the stars thinned. The next morning, before the frost had melted, the stepmother was already waiting. Her eyes were sharp, her mouth tight. You're not going to ruin this house for me, she said. You think your silence makes you better? It don't. It just makes you forgettable. The girl stood still. Not from fear, but something older, heavier. You think that horse is gonna save you? The woman barked. He's half dead. Same as your dreams. Then she raised her hand. The slap wasn't loud, but it echoed. Jonah heard it. That night, the girl was locked in the root cellar, no candle, no blanket. Just dirt walls and the smell of potatoes long rotted. The stepmother's footsteps thudded above her like war drums. She curled into herself, listening to her heartbeat until it sounded like hooves. It was well after midnight when she heard it. A faint, metallic click. Then another. The cellar door creaked. A pause. Then the latch fell open with a thud, slow and final. She sat up, eyes wide in the dark. No footsteps followed. Just silence and the faint rustle of hay from outside. Her body trembled as she crept up the stairs, pushed the door wider. Moonlight spilled across the kitchen floor like spilled milk. The house was silent. She stepped outside. The barn door was ajar. And Jonah stood there. Not sleeping. Not eating. Watching. He didn't move. But the girl felt something shift deep in her chest, something that wasn't fear or hope, but closer to memory, something remembered from long ago, when love meant safety and horses understood secrets. She looked around once. The prairie was silver with frost. Her breath rose like smoke. Jonah blinked, just once, slow and solemn. The girl stepped into the barn and whispered, Did you? But she didn't finish the question. Because somehow, in that frozen moment, she already knew the answer. The world before sunrise was a quiet thing, stitched with mist and low stars and the soft crunch of hooves on frostbitten dirt. The girl moved through it like a shadow with Jonah beside her, their shapes long and ghostly beneath the pale horizon. She hadn't taken anything from the house. No bundle, no food, no coat. Just herself, her bare feet, and the horse that had opened her prison with no hands. The wind bit her skin like small teeth. Her breath came fast at first, then slowed into steady clouds. Jonah limped at her side, his pace unhurried, his breath loud in the silence. She didn't lead him. He followed as though the two of them had agreed to vanish together. They walked until the sky turned from steel to bone to soft gray pearl. The girl's feet bled in places. Her hands were raw from gripping fences. But she didn't stop. She wouldn't, not until they reached somewhere unnamed, unreachable. Mid-morning brought the sound of a river. Not a roar, but a low, constant murmur like someone thinking aloud. She stumbled toward it, and collapsed at the edge, her body folding into the dirt like a leaf. Jonah lowered his head to drink. The water steamed from his nostrils. She let her arms fall wide. Her dress was torn. Her hair tangled with twigs. Her chest rose and fell in shallow waves. The sky above looked empty. Then came the creak of leather. A figure on a hill. She tried to move but only managed to blink. A man led his horse down the slope slowly, like someone who didn't want to startle the earth. He wore a hat slouched low, a coat the color of clay, and boots stitched with dust. His beard was short, unkempt. His eyes, when they met hers, didn't ask questions. He crouched beside her without touching. His gaze passed over her hands, the blood on her heel, the edge of fear behind her eyes. You runnin' or lost? He asked gently. She looked past him, toward Jonah. Both, she whispered. He nodded once, like he understood that answer better than any other. Then he offered water and a coat. She didn't ask who he was. And he didn't ask her name. There was an unspoken rule between them: questions were for people with time and comfort. Right now, they had only silence and need. He helped her into the saddle, slow and careful, then led her horse behind his. Jonah followed close, as if unwilling to let even air pass between them. The man's ranch was modest. 1 barn, 2 sheds, a crooked fence, and a house that leaned slightly west as though tired of standing against the wind. But it was clean, and warm, and real. She slept for nearly a full day. When she woke, the sun was low again. The man was outside chopping wood, the sound rhythmic, steady, honest. She watched through the window. His shoulders moved like a tide, not fast, not showy, just strong. Purposeful. There was something in the air around him. Not the kind of quiet that follows sorrow, but the kind that grows things. He didn't ask why she had run. He didn't look at her like she was broken. Just offered porridge, a chair, and his porch as a place to sit. And she did sit. Every evening, while he worked or smoked, she sat there, Jonah just beyond the fence, grazing. Some nights, the man would say a word or two, about the weather, the soil, the hawks nesting in the canyon. Other nights he said nothing. And she found, to her surprise, that it was enough. He taught her small things. How to mend a bridle without tearing the leather. How to spot spoiled grain by its smell. How to stand so a horse wouldn't spook when saddling. She listened carefully. Grateful. He watched her work with quiet eyes. Noticing without intruding. When she fumbled, he corrected without blame. When she succeeded, he said, "Good," like he meant it. In that small space, something started to grow, not like a fire, sudden and bright, but like a root beneath earth, deep and patient. One night, sitting by the hearth, she spoke. Not everything. Just enough. "He died," she said softly. "My father. And after that, I stopped being someone. I just became useful." He didn't reply right away. Stirred the fire. Then, gently, "You didn't stop being someone. Someone just stopped seeing you." She didn't cry. Not then. But the breath she let out felt heavier than anything she'd carried on her back. Jonah whinnied from outside. She rose to check on him. The barn was dark but calm. Jonah stood in his usual place, the hay tucked beneath him. She brushed his mane with her fingers and pressed her forehead to his neck. "You found me a place, didn't you?" she whispered. "Somehow." Jonah shifted slightly, enough for her to feel his weight lean into her. "Just a little." She smiled, small and quiet. The man appeared at the doorway, one hand on the frame, backlit by the lantern behind him. "He means a lot to you." She nodded. "He remembers who I was." The man stepped closer, slow and steady. His voice was almost too soft to hear. "I don't know what she called you, but I call you free." She turned toward him then, not with surprise, not with fear, but with something close to recognition. As though she'd waited her whole life for someone to say it like that. Like a promise and not a favor. Outside, the stars had returned. Inside, Jonah's ears twitched once. Then, from the ridge behind the barn, a flicker of movement. The girl froze. A rider. Watching. Still as stone. Her heart stopped mid-beat. She took a step toward the door. The man followed her gaze, his jaw tightening. The rider turned their horse and vanished into the darkness. But the silence that followed was no longer peaceful. It was a warning. The rider had vanished into the folds of night, but his shadow stayed behind, pressed into the back of the girl's thoughts like a boot print in wet soil. She stood long after the dust had settled, heart hammering, breath shallow. The man beside her said nothing. He didn't ask. He didn't offer comfort. He just waited, as if he knew the story was already spilling without words. That evening, she didn't eat. She sat beside Jonah in the barn, her hand buried in his mane, the silence around them thick and slow. He stood still, watching the open doorway, ears twitching as if catching something she couldn't hear. The night was too quiet. The wind held its breath. At dawn, a traveler came by. Dusty boots, wide hat, teeth yellowed by chewing tobacco. Said he passed through Dawson Ridge and heard a woman ranting at the sheriff about a girl who'd stolen her husband's horse, her dignity, her roof. He chuckled when he said it, but the girl did not smile. Her stomach turned to stone. She stood up and went to the man chopping wood. "She's coming." He didn't look at her. Just kept splitting logs. "I can't let you get caught in it," she said. "I should go before they do." His axe paused mid-swing. "You run again, and you'll never stop," he said quietly. "Let the law come if it must. I'll speak truth. So will Jonah." The girl blinked. Her throat felt too small to hold words. The sky above was colorless, waiting. "She'll lie," she murmured. "Then let her lie," he replied. "Truth don't need shouting. It just needs standing still." She sat on the porch steps the rest of the morning, hands folded in her lap. Jonah stood at the edge of the fence line, rigid, facing the open road. The chickens were quiet. Even the trees seemed to be listening. By mid-afternoon, a dust cloud rose over the horizon. 5 riders. 1 wagon. A sheriff in tan with a tin star dulled by years. And at the front of it all, her stepmother. She rode with her chin lifted, her dress neat, her boots polished like truth could be scrubbed into her skin. The girl felt the heat rise in her chest, but she stayed seated. The horses halted. The stepmother climbed down and cast a sweeping glance over the land. "There she is," she spat. "My thief. My girl." The sheriff didn't dismount. "You pressing charges or just spreading rumors, widow?" he asked. "She stole from me," the stepmother hissed. "Ran off with a horse and my dignity. Left me near starved." The man beside the girl stepped forward then. His voice was steady. "That horse wasn't yours. It belonged to her mother. Her father left it to her before he passed. You beat her, locked her in a cellar. She came to my land half dead." The stepmother's face twisted like a rope pulled too tight. "She's mine by law," she snapped. "She was promised. You're harboring what's not yours." The sheriff squinted. He turned to the girl. "Is this true?" She stood. Not tall, not proud. Just calm. "I was never hers. Not in spirit. Not in love. Only on paper. And paper burns." The sheriff exhaled slowly. One of the men behind him shifted in his saddle. The wind picked up, dry and sharp. "I got no interest in old grudges," the sheriff said. "But if you got proof of abuse, I'll listen." The girl stepped forward. She turned and lifted the hem of her sleeve, revealing bruises still yellowing, shaped like fingerprints. Then she turned again and lifted her hair, showing the scar behind her ear. "She didn't feed me," she said quietly. "Didn't call me by name. Said I was plain, a burden, a debt to be traded. I'm 17, but I feel 70. The stepmother's lip curled. "You're lying. You always were good at twisting things, just like your mother." Jonah neighed, loud and sudden. All heads turned. The old horse moved. Not rush, not wild, but deliberate. He pushed through the fence with a creak of splinters. Walked forward, stiff but strong, eyes locked on the woman who had once raised a switch at him like he was furniture. She backed away, tripping slightly. "Get that beast back!" she shouted. "He's mad!" Jonah stopped a few feet away. His breath was heavy. His chest rose like a tide. Then, as if led by something deeper than instinct, he reared. The hooves didn't strike her, but they landed close enough to send her sprawling, dress torn, face scraped. Her hat flew into the dust. The sheriff raised a brow. "Well, he's got an opinion," he muttered. The stepmother scrambled to her feet, trembling. "You all saw it! That thing's dangerous." "No," the man said quietly, stepping beside the girl. "He's just finally been heard." The sheriff looked between them. "I see no crime here. I see a girl who fled hell and a man who gave her shelter. You want justice, widow, you best start looking in a mirror. The stepmother's face turned red as rust. She turned, climbed into the wagon, and snapped the reins. The party rode off with no farewells. The dust they left behind clung to the air like smoke from a long doused fire. Jonah stood motionless. Then, slowly, he lowered his head. That night, the girl fed him sweet corn and sang softly beneath her breath. The stars were sharp, the air too still. At dawn, he did not rise. She found him lying peacefully under the apple tree, breast shallow. His eye closed as she knelt beside him. Jonah, she whispered, pressing her cheek to his. He let out one long exhale. And then no more. The ground was soft where they buried him, just beyond the fence, beneath the only apple tree that bloomed in spring. She carved the marker herself, her hands blistered from the chisel, her eyes dry, not from lack of tears, but because she'd poured them all into his mane the night before. Here lies Jonah, the last knight of the West, it read. The man stood beside her as she placed the stone. He didn't speak, didn't offer her comfort in the form of words. Instead, he held silence like a cloak between them, letting her grief unfold like prairie smoke, slow, spiraling, impossible to catch. Jonah's passing marked something more than loss. It was the closing of one life and the aching birth of another. She felt it in the quietness of her own body, how it no longer curled in fear or flinched at loud noises. She breathed differently now, deeper, steadier. As though the land itself had given her permission. Spring came late that year, brushing the plains with wild flowers too stubborn to die. She planted herbs near Jonah's grave, lavender, chamomile, thyme. When the wind passed through, the scents rose like memories. The man taught her to ride again, this time on a colt with soft eyes and a silver streak down his back. The foal was Jonah's grandson, wild but not cruel, curious and quick-footed. She named him Ashes, not from sorrow, but from reverence. From what remains when fire gives way to sky. Every morning she rose with the sun and tended to the ranch. She fixed the shed roof, mended the fence, cleaned the troughs. The work grounded her, gave shape to the time between sunrises. And each evening she found herself drawn to the porch, where the man would sit with his coffee and his quiet eyes. They spoke more now. Not about the past. Not about pain. But about the hawks nesting again in the canyon. The mule deer tracks by the river. The way the clouds rolled in like painted caravans. He told her she looked different when she smiled, not softer, but braver. Like someone who'd survived fire and didn't feel the need to announce it. She told him he was steady, like rain that didn't flood. Like stars that never asked to be watched. He laughed then. The sound startled them both. One morning, with spring soft in the air, he stood beside her near the trough. She had just poured water, arms dripping from the splash. He watched her shake the droplets from her sleeves, his hands tucked in his belt. "You don't have to stay," he said, voice gentle. "You're free to go wherever calls you." She met his eyes. "I know," she said. He hesitated. "And if this place called you?" She didn't answer right away. Then, slowly, she reached out, not with urgency, not with need, but with the quiet confidence of someone choosing. Her fingers found his, rough and warm and waiting. "I think it already did," she whispered. They didn't marry with fanfare. No preacher. No rings. No guests but the breeze and the wind chime that hung crooked above the porch. One day, they simply began walking side by side and never stopped. He built her a room of her own, not because he wanted her apart, but because he wanted her to have space that was hers. She filled it with books, scraps of cloth, and stories she wrote on paper bags and the backs of grain sacks. Not letters anymore. Just words, free ones, not asking to be found. She never saw the stepmother again. Rumors floated in from town like tumbleweeds. She'd moved east, remarried, then vanished. The girl didn't chase them down. Some stories didn't need endings to be finished. One night, as cicadas hummed low and the stars blinked like sleepy fireflies, she rode Ashes out past the ridge. The moon was a silver coin in a velvet sky. Her hair whipped behind her, wild and untethered. She didn't ride to escape now. She rode because the land no longer frightened her. Because the wind no longer carried her name as a plea, but as a prayer. She returned just before midnight and found the man sitting on the porch, boots off, mug in hand. "You rode far tonight," he said. "I needed to hear the world," she replied. He patted the step beside him. She sat. Their shoulders touched. Neither pulled away. "You think he knew?" she asked after a long silence. "Jonah. What he was doing?" He looked out across the field, where moonlight turned grass into rippling silver. "I think some hearts beat louder than hooves," he said. "And some souls were born knowing how to carry more than their share." She nodded slowly. They sat there until dawn began to bleed across the sky, soft and pink and full of promise. When the first light touched Jonah's grave, the wind shifted. She closed her eyes. There was a sound, brief, unmistakable. The shuffle of hooves. The low rumble of a nicker. She opened her eyes quickly. But the pasture was still. Still, except for Ashes, who stood facing east, ears perked, body alert. As though waiting for someone. She rose to her feet. And in the golden hush of morning she whispered, "Jonah?"